Welcome, everybody. I'm just going to quickly introduce Peter. It's my pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Dr. Peter Vielehr, who is the Director of Analytics at the Albuquerque Police Department. You might have just seen him present at the webinar. We have been doing Tableau public safety webinars, and Peter just presented and had a wonderful presentation. And he shared lots of information about the Albuquerque Police Department and how they're transforming their data culture post-consent decree, how they're leveraging Tableau Prep and building dashboards. But there was so much wonderful information, we ran out of time. And I asked Peter if he can come and present for us more today, and he agreed. So thank you so much, Peter. I'm going to turn it over to you. The floor is all yours. Hopefully we can, as Chris said, look a little bit deeper into things, and you can share a bit more information with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me here. So I think we're a small group, so I think I'd be interested in kind of having some discussion around kind of what folks are doing and, you know, what's being successful. Kind of the webinar that I had put together, you know, had a little bit more information on thinking about data maturity and, you know, what kind of pieces go into your data maturity model and how you build analytics capacity and sort of how we've used Tableau through that, you know, about data culture management, personnel, systems, governance, all those things. I don't want to rehash all that. You can go watch a webinar if you want to see that. But, you know what? I have this problem whenever I present, because I used to be a professor, that I can take way too much time talking about stuff and then miss a lot of examples because, you know, when I was a professor, I just roll it over to the next class session. But so I was able to sort of skim over a few examples of kind of the work, some of the things that we've been doing. And, you know, I think what I wanted to go through this time was kind of actually dive into what those examples look like and open up some workbooks and really kind of dig into like what we're doing. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen. If I can find it. Okay. So just baseline, we are using Tableau Server. And so this allows us to have automated emails. So a lot of what we've found has been really effective to really do dissemination is automations and automating out the emails that people want. I don't know why, but actually clicking through to dashboards is very challenging for some people. And they want it in their inbox at 8 a.m. when they show up in the office, and they want all the information right there. So that's some feedback we got early on. This allows us to do that, but you know, there's some tweaks that you have to do to make things work in PDFs that you don't have to do other ways. So that's been one of the more effective things for us so far. I'm hoping this like changes as we build out some better content that's dynamic that people will have to go and then be able to look at. We also have the data management add-on, which allows for Prep Conductor to run on schedules. And so we have a lot of things built out as prep flows that does our data prep, but you can publish those to server without data management. You actually have to log in and click a button to run flows. And I want that prep happening every morning. So I want to be able to do that. There's also I'm starting to work a little bit more with the REST API to control the server. And there's some running flows and some features in the REST API that you need data management for that was really helpful. So that's something that we've done quite a bit. It also gives you data catalog and lineage features that are not sort of native to the base product. And then we have RServe installed on our report, and I'll go into why in one of the examples, but RServe is basically an interface to R, right? It allows you to put R scripts into workbooks or R scripts into your flows, and then get the output from those R scripts and bring it back into Tableau. So it allows you to do some more advanced analyses and some more advanced features that are not built in. So the example I'll talk about is sampling. And I think this is it's super simple. And I think it's actually really great. So like the first case study I'm going to talk about is our automated monthly force report. And so I was just wondering from anybody on the call if anyone sort of uses Tableau in this way, where to create sort of your public reporting that's sort of automated month to month, right? So how many folks are kind of doing that? I don't have polls on this version. So if anyone wants to jump in and talk about how they do it, that would be great. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, I think we can use the raise hand feature maybe. So we do some automated monthly force reports. They're not public at all. They're all internal, but we do a lot with it where we are comparing ages of officers to ages of victims or the suspects, offenders. So we are doing it. The one thing I was going to ask is, where do you get your force reports from? Are you using IA Pro or some other system, just so we can get a baseline for that as well?
We're an IA Pro.
Right. Okay. Yes, we're an IA Pro too. So yeah, so we've done a lot of work with it. We've noticed that our data is not the greatest by using some of these reporting. So that's been a good benefit. And we're actually working on some public data that we're going to be using for force reports for complaints in general. So IA Pro is a very good data set if they put it in properly.
Yeah, we noticed some of the same stuff, right? And so actually when we started doing this graph of locations of force by area command, we started seeing like, hey, these counts, the number of dots doesn't match the number up here, right? And so we're like, why is this? Like, our area command, it should be that where the dot is located should be the area command that it happened in. And so we ended up going back and sort of finding out that like the area command is being documented from a drop-down menu. And for some reason, investigators have a hard time knowing what area command they're in sometimes. And so we actually ended up building out validations that like matches the geo coordinates onto the drop-down menu to make sure that they matched. And if they don't match, it gets automatically pinged back to our admin staff who does our data updates. So we can try to build in some of those internal loops for data quality. And so we're building in those validations as we go. So so I was going to just pull up this workbook, right? And because like the way that we sort of organize this report is we actually what we do is we have a image file that we created that is our formatting, right? So we took our formatting and then we sort of scaffold around that. So when we export this as a letter-shaped PDF, everything that's on there is going to come out looking how we expect. So it's kind of like, before I started this job and started using Tableau, I was doing all of my sort of PDF reporting compiled from R Markdown in LaTeX. And it was a real pain to get everything right. And then things shifted and, somebody would put a special character in a text field and then it would break everything. So this really allowed it to sort of be a graphical interface where like there's not a lot of programming involved, but we were able to sort of set it up with every single page having its own dashboard that dynamically updates every month. And then so for our analysts who go through and do some validation, they can see, information about what the case is, make sure everything matches up. We can actually even, in some of our newer reports, for accessibility, we move some of the counts away from just in the tables or graphs and actually start putting them into text boxes and have those set up dynamically for those text boxes. If you see last month, we have a lot of use of force down in this area and along here, right? So this is kind of our major problem areas. And that's where we tend to have the most use of force. And so this, this becomes a public document. We produce this and send it off to our civilian oversight board, and we get it out by the 5th business day of every month, right? So we've had really quick turnaround times on this, but all of our graphs, we have set so that when we want to export it, it's really a click of a button. The first day or two, we make sure that everything lines up correctly. Some things take I downloaded this from the server to be able to show it, and sometimes doesn't love connections and changing the connections. But we have all of our rates calculated: a force rate per 1,000 calls for service, a force rate per 100 arrests, by area command. All of these things are in flows that run every day, so that all of those stats are all sitting there and then are ready to go when this is ready to be pulled out.
Peter, what time frame are you looking at right here?
This is 1 month. So this is June 2025. So on the first day of the month, this flips over into the previous month, right? So July 1st, it becomes a June report. And then August 1st, it'll become a July report. And so all of everything on this page will completely change on the 1st of the month.
And how is it? Because the update runs on the server once a month?
No, it's actually because we set everything up with a relative date filter.
Okay.
So we set everything up to be the previous month. And so every single graph on here is set up to just flip over at the beginning of the month. The first probably 6 months, we noticed bugs with either how the filters were set up or something, right? So it took a lot of sort of debugging as we went through. But by setting it up this way, on the 1st of the month, we're good. We have a new report that we're doing on a monthly basis where we're driving it with a parameter that on the 1st of the month, the parameter will update, but it also allows you to go back to be able to produce previous month's reports in case we need to ever do that. So this is basically what we're doing. It took some time to build this out, but having it set up in this way, once it's published to server, right? So the next step is once we have this published onto server, it looks like this, and we can, go through and see every page as it would be published. And then downloading the PDF is basically this will create the entire report and download it. So it's like probably the amount of time this has saved from before we had this set up, where this is the PDF report we just looked at. We used to have this set up as either a Word document, or before we started using Tableau, this was all coming from SQL queries in Excel, and then would get put together in a Word document every month. And it was a mess. And every single month there was something wrong, and it would go through rounds of revisions. And if we got it out by the middle of the month, it was like a good month. Oksana, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I have one more question, and I think you mentioned it, but so I know you, now I understand how the data is updated, but as far as the text, did you say some of it you have to change some of the wording, or all of it is dynamic also?
So this right now, we have one spot in this report that is still manual, right? So
Okay.
it's actually on this page. We have a way to fix it now, but so this part says 1 completed investigation and 2 completed level 3 investigations had approved extensions to 120 days, right? So we have a 90-day deadline on all of our use and force investigations. This one line has to be updated manually in the report. And because we didn't have a good method to track whether there was an approved extension, because being a PDF or a document that a memo that an investigator submits to their chain of command that gets attached to a force investigation, we now have that set up as a category where they can attach. It's a category that they attach to the investigation where they label it that has approved extension. So now we can actually go in and say, all right, this one that took more than 120 days has an approved extension. So I have an analyst working on this to get this line of text to be dynamic, so that we know when those approved extensions come in and that anything beyond the deadline has that extension in place. So that's the only place in this report.
That's great. That's amazing.
And now we have a way to track that. It took actually quite a bit of like a whole new flow, a whole new engineering process to actually build out the ability to get this one data point. But, we're able to now port that into all sorts of other reports, to be able to track the extensions that are in place. So that's been a good process as well. We do have some internal reports that are kind of the similar process that didn't show for the webinar. Like, this has been a huge time saver. Like, this saves, an analyst at least a week of work. And it was a lift to get it set up, but now that it's there, it's really sped up this process. So I'm wondering if there's any other examples that folks can think of or that I've worked on that are kind of similarly driving some of their, an ease of reporting.
I can certainly provide one. I'll start off with this. So we have our crime reporting that's due every year, and we typically try to get it out by October of the following year. We have not gotten it out even in that same year. It has carried over almost a year and a half at times because of the manual work and everything that's needed to be done to get that completed. We've created, exactly like you did, 8.5 by 11 dashboards where we just choose from one of the workbooks, or one of the worksheets rather. We choose the type of crime. It does everything for us. The crime in the year that we're trying to do. It builds those 4 or 5 or 6 dashboards, and we send it out to PDF, and then we do the next one. So what took us months to do for our crime in Maryland book is now only taking us hours, which was a crazy difference. But it's exactly like you're talking about doing. Is if the data's there, you create them in 8.5 by 11. They're not really dynamic, but they work for reporting, and PDF them, combine them, and we're done with a 300-page book in a matter of hours, as opposed to the weeks and or months that it used to take before that.
Well, and we have a number of things sort of that are like built in SSRS reports, but just like being able to change SSRS reports is a lot harder than being able to change a Tableau report, right? So our speed of updates and like the design and being able to get it more customized in a much easier way for an analyst. Like, I don't have to have IT update SSRS and things like that. And we can do it all from here, which is like a huge time save.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else on the call want to share anything they do similarly?
Yeah, another example of one that we built out recently was our homicide unit has their own tracking that they do that is a legacy sort of. It's built in Esri, so it's like a Esri dashboard that has a data source underneath it, and they've been using this for years. Well, it doesn't match our records management system for all the time, right?
Yeah.
So previously our records analyst or a crime analyst was pulling data from both sources, and then I manually going back and forth to try to reconcile what differences there were. So I built out a automated pull from the REST API for Esri that pulls that, so we can upload that into Tableau. We also have our data from records management system in Tableau. And so then we can run all of our compares automatically and produce a report that lists out the number of homicides that are tracked in one spot but not the other, or vice versa, or the number that are being tracked as justifiable homicides but don't have the supplements submitted yet to get them updated through records. So that's like one of those processes that was a huge headache that was taking months and months to actually get that, and now we just have an update every day. So we have a dashboard that's always up to date. I can pull a PDF on any day and tell you where any of the discrepancies. So that's one that we just worked on to try to free up crime analysis and our records to be able to actually do other stuff.
I saw Greg had his hand up.
But yeah, I was just going to share, I'm in Anne Arundel in Maryland, and we put all of our use of force out in this public dashboard right here. I'll share it in the chat. But we're behind. The goal was kind of trying to do it every quarter, and we're using IA Pro as well. But of course, it's usually happening once a year now. But you can see that you can go on there, you can download all the data if you're the public, and just it's I guess a little more user friendly. But we're putting all that stuff out there to the public. It's just a little bit behind.
What's driving sort of being behind?
So I'm working with somebody in IA usually to make sure all the stats are correct. So it's more or less just trying to catch up with all the use of forces, making sure they're all completed, and then working out all the bugs of input error on their end. So and then just a million other projects that we work on. So that's hopefully we can get it going where we're going to be able to update it quarterly at least. But right now we're a little behind on it. But it's better than the old system. The old system was as you'll see underneath of that, you have all the old years listed there.
Wow.
And that's how they used to do it. They used to just download something out of IA Pro and share it.
Yeah, I feel like we've all had these struggles with IA Pro, and I know for at least our purposes, we did not spend the time we probably should have years ago in creating drop downs. And we have since stopped any open field text boxes and things like that. So now it's just officer error where they select the wrong item as opposed to just typing stuff in. So we've learned some lessons there to improve the data in that respect. But yeah, IA Pro allowed a lot of open-ended text in the past.
Yeah, we had the same problem. We've had a couple of different commanders over the last couple of years who have switched the way they input everything, and we had to go back and fix it all. So it's been definitely a little bit of a challenge, but I think we're on the right path now.
Yeah, we've definitely gone through phases of that problem. I think one thing that happened with us was during the consent decree there, in 2020, or 2019, 2020, monitoring team basically got to the point where we don't trust anything coming out from your stats. And so our force division ended up going back and basically re-entering data back to like 2016 and fixing everything. So we have things in our IA Pro before 2016, but we don't report on it because it just was not consistent. And but going back, and now when we do make changes, we have like documented written rules about like what it should look like, and then the process in place, and everybody should agree to it, and not have the like, well, we're changing this drop down. I'm like, all right, well, we have to discuss what we're changing, what the process changes. Things end up affecting like our early intervention system if there's changes. So like re-engineer our queries for our early intervention system. We have to redo reports. So like there's a whole bunch of downstream impacts whenever those little changes get made. Changing types of force, like we'll break a report. And so we have a good like sense of that now, where we have much better communication with each other whenever we're changing a report or changing a field or adding something, so that we know that things have to be updated. But we're trying to have better definitions, right? So that if we do have a new commander come in, there's kind of a historical knowledge of like, don't just go changing things willy-nilly. We all have to sort of agree that, these things need to change. Also, I think we're trying to do more on like this monthly reporting has been really great for our annual reports. We just finished our annual use of force report for last year, and we had like almost no data updates for that report because we've been doing it every month, putting out this report with all of the data checks for a year and a half now, or a little more than a year and a half, because we started at like the end of 2023. And so we had our annual report was a piece of cake. So that might be a way to think to like work towards better data quality to go public, is to sort of do some of this more regular reporting. All right, so that was one example, the case study that I talked about at the webinar of kind of these reports. And I'm happy to like meet with anybody offline to sort of talk more about it if there's specific things that could be helpful to talk through, because we spent a lot of time working through a lot of these reports. We had to work through a lot of edge cases, and then we still do human validation, right? So every month we still validate before we put things out to the public, and we would still, when we have public data, which we're trying to work toward getting public raw data, we would still have that data quality check before we put out an entire month. The next thing I had talked about in the webinar was how we're using Tableau Prep to sample data for audits. So when I was coming on board, there were some concerns about cherry picking data for audits. Like our monitors wanted to make sure that when we audited data, we were truly taking a random representative sample of whatever we were looking at. And I have the same concern as a research person, where I'm like, well, how do we know we're getting a cross section of what we want to look at? While also recognizing that not every case is going to be as informative as any other case when we're actually doing a review. So we have a number of samples that we run that pulls it out of, when we run that sample, it pulls it out of whoever the person doing the audit is running the sample. So a third party is pulling the sample. And then we're also able to apply sampling weights to try to identify the cases that are going to be most informative. So I had pulled in this example. I'm not going to go through this example because I think this one's too complicated. I went through the script. Actually do this. We do this using R to run the sample, where we're able to specify a sampling weight and then pull a sample based off of that. So I was actually going to pull up for one of our more basic samples. This is what I have a automation set up that sends this to the unit that needs it. So this is a use of force sample for an audit that pulls 10 level 2 and level 3 uses of force on the first of the month. This was the one sampled July 1st. And it automatically will send this to the unit that needs it. And everything is running in the background. So I actually don't have to touch it on the first of the month. And so I was going to walk through building, like what this looks like. So just generally, we have 2 flows, and I'll talk about those 2 flows that are running, creating 2 data sources that then fill this out. And so our process, basically, I diagrammed it, right? So we have our initial data source, right? This is where all of our data is coming from. So in this case, it's use of force data. And then we pull that into Tableau Prep. And that Tableau Prep is going to do some data prep steps on it to get into a, all of our data sets have duplicated rows and duplicated case numbers. So it's going to get distinct case numbers to sample. And then it's going to run a sampling script through R, rejoin that back into the original data set that we want. And then we'll structure that how we want it to look. And we'll publish a data source. And then then create our sample report from that. The problem is, if I run this on the first of the month, sometimes that runs on a Sunday where our admins haven't fully completed a case yet. It might have actually been completed on like June 28th. So if I just use a date filter on it, it's actually not going to be correct and cases slip through the cracks. And so we realized this early, like kind of after the first couple months on doing some sampling, is that we were having cases that were being backdated a couple days because they were completed, but the admins or the investigators didn't complete them and close them out for a couple days, and then they backdated the completion date. And so we ended up designing where we have a second flow built in that creates a data source that we can then use as a filter. So if we've already sampled something, we don't see it. Generally, how this looks when we set it up is, so we have in Tableau server, we have our force data sets. So we have, one single source of data that's all been compiled from IA Pro that we can do like 95% of our force reporting from. And it's got, a couple hundred fields. In this case, I just selected 3 fields, the level of force, the case number, and when it happened. Right? And I filtered out just cases that happened this year. I could change this out to, just this month or the previous month. So if I want to just look at the previous month, this will pull all of the force cases that happened in the previous month. I then found duplicate rows. So I found the duplicate rows. I excluded duplicates just to get unique cases. And then I removed that field. Then the sampling process, so I basically pulled this up here. I dropped the occurred date just so I have what the fields that I wanted. And then I pull a random sample. And the way I do that actually is using an R script. And so I'm going to pull R over here. So I am a R advocate. I really like R, and I think it's a great resource for people to know. In order to get our serve to run and talk to Tableau, you actually have to start our serve. And so I have a little script that just has It loads the rserve library, runs rserve, and then I usually put that at, like, I have that run automatically usually. And then basically this is there's two functions in a script that Tableau can run. The first one is the function that you actually want to run. And so your input data set this is what Tableau spits out, right? Is this data frame. And so from this data frame, I can then access any of the columns that I had in my input. So any of the columns in here are going to be accessible from R if I reference this data frame. I can add things to this sample. Anything that is available in R, I can do to this, right? And then I can return whatever data frame I want. So I can return whatever I want. So I can do anything I want in this step. And so I actually have gotten a little bit fancier with being able to, there's a lot more in this stratification step where, like, I can do a stratified random sample based on whatever parameters I want. You can do a whole bunch of recoding. You can pull in other scripts, other packages, other libraries, whatever you need into this. And then you just return the data frame you want to bring back to Tableau, tell it what data types to expect, so the variable names, right? So I created a cases and I created an order. So this is going to sample every single case that it sees and then order it in the order that it gets sampled. And then that comes back to prep. Let me add a clean step in here so you can see what comes back. So this comes back with an order on it. So this is a randomized order now, right? So if I want a random sample of 10 cases, I can take cases 1 through 10, and it's a simple random sample of all of these case numbers. But I keep everything in there. So if I ever need a random sample of 20, I've got a random sample of 20. Or if somebody wants more or less, I only have to run this once and I have that random sample. I join it back in case there's columns that I need, right? So this occurred date, I can join this back on. And now I've got my occurred date is in here. And then I can create my output and save that up to Tableau server and use that to develop my report. The first time I run something like this, you can't use your output as an input. So that's why we have to create a running list of everything we've sampled over time to make sure that as we're sort of creating this feedback loop, we're capturing every case. Oksana, you got your hand up.
Yes, just a quick question. So that script that you created in R, can it be reused pretty much by everybody? They will just need to change the column names in there, right? But the logic should be somewhat the same.
Yeah, so for samples, I pretty much have like one script that we can change, right? And I store it on our shared drive so that everybody has access to it. And then it can be customized onto whatever pieces. So like here. So for instance, this one we use a sampling weight in this version that I screenshotted here. So we have a sampling weight whether there's a behavioral health component to the case. And so we define out in our prep flow what we mean by behavioral health component. And so then what we can say is that anything that has a behavioral health component gets a probability of 2 of being included and a 1 if it doesn't, right? So we sample it at its true probability if there's no behavioral health, but we double the probability of selection if there's a behavioral health component in that force case. And that lets us actually oversample behavioral health cases, because about 1/3 of our force cases has a behavioral health component as part of it. And those are ones that we want to make sure are getting heard by our force review board and are getting sampled for our review processes. And so we oversample those. We also recently added an oversample to level 3 uses of force, because those are less common than level 2s. And so our force review board wasn't getting enough level 3 force. And so we added a sampling weight onto level 3s. And now we can track that, like, a level 3 case with a behavioral health component has a 4 times probability of being included in our force review board sample. And by tracking everything that we're sampling, we can, if we actually ever needed to, we could go back and we could tell you what the probability of any specific case being heard by your force review board is. And if you're a survey researcher, that actually means something, because we could then develop a sampling weight based on the probability of inclusion in our sample, so that we could use our force review board to get population statistics that are weighted to the true population. We haven't done that because we haven't had a need to do that, but I'm a survey researcher by training, so the possibility.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, Peter has PhD in sociology, right? Is that?
Yeah.
Yes.
But like, if we ever needed to, we could go back. We wanted to know, like, our force review board has reviewed, these 100 cases. How does that actually reflect onto the full population from that sample? We could then develop a sampling weight to be able to use what the force review board has done by reviewing that sample, to then speak back to the full population of force cases. If we were not tracking that sampling weight and the probability of selection, you wouldn't be able to develop a sampling weight for, like, regression model. So that's kind of like super, like, in the weeds stuff that, like, probably isn't stuff we'll ever actually report to anybody. But I like the possibility that we could do that if we need to. It could be helpful for research. It could be helpful for, if we ever get a question coming down in the future of, like, what proportion of our force cases, would have, problems that, like, the force review board would identify. We could actually create that because we're doing a true random sample. What they were doing before was getting a list of cases pulled from our force division, and then somehow in an Excel workbook selecting them randomly, right? Like saying there's 50 cases here and we want 5, and so we're going to take, every 10th case. And like, that's an option, but it's not truly random. So this sort of solves some of those problems. The ability to schedule it as well for, like, the first of the month is huge, right? So going back to what we actually do in our Tableau server, this report, we have subscriptions going out. We run all of our tasks on a schedule, right? So we have a schedule that runs all of these. And so they run in the correct order as linked tasks within our server, so that the next month we're queued up and we're running this the first of the month. We can run this at 8:30. The subscription goes out at 9, so that we can then sort of just deal with all of the samples that we need to take that supports our audit unit, that supports our force review board unit, that supports our field training unit. They audit cases for field training officers. All of those things are now automated to whatever schedules they need, so that we're not spending a ton of time doing it, so that it's a third party doing it and it's auditable. If we ever need to go back and audit, we can do that. And I don't know, from a sort of simplicity standpoint, I think this is like one of those like really simple use cases that I've never heard anybody talk about, but it takes it out of my hands. It takes it out of a unit's hands to sample their own cases. Our crisis intervention unit used to draw their own samples of CAD calls, and they would, pull a list of CADs from the CAD system and then try to sample it in an Excel workbook somehow. I didn't even think Excel really had sampling functions, and I don't think they really do. So we are able to sort of get around that and pull all of these samples and automate them so that they're going out to the right people at the right times. I think this is great. This is one of my favorite use cases because I don't ever hear people talking about it. So most agencies that I've talked to have some sort of audits that go on that could be supported this way. And it's one of those use cases that as we were talking about data maturity, this sort of just leveled up our ability to, be able to just get this running and sort of and be able to pull these in a consistent way every month.
Peter, this is
so-
great. I also wanted to share with everybody that I know this might be, more complicated, but I'm sure you all work with wonderful analysts. And the programming languages like R and Python can be integrated with Tableau for various use cases. I know at Chicago Police Department for forecasting, we use Python, because Tableau has forecasting feature, but it's not very good. It's not reliable. So Python has much better package. But so something to think about that also, or talk with your analysts, that sometimes R and Python can be very helpful in conjunction with Tableau.
Yeah, and I think in Tableau Prep, I really like doing it in Tableau Prep, right? For things like forecasting, I really want to do run a forecast, right? And I want to be able to do it with a known set of data. And if you do it in Tableau Prep, you actually can know exactly what format you're going to get back and run it on the schedule that you want. It's nice. Sometimes it's nice to do it in workbook where your filters will update and it'll automatically update that. But if your model takes a long time, every time you try to update filters, it's going to be a pain. So if your model takes a while, doing it in Tableau Prep and pulling back your model data, your model output, sometimes is the kind of a better way to go. But for simple regressions and stuff, you can do those in workbooks, and then they can be dynamic based off of the filters that you set or what people are selecting, and it can do some interesting stuff. For simple models, that makes a lot of sense. If you're doing something more complicated or computationally intensive, so using a pre-trained model and then using it with new data, Tableau Prep is probably a better choice for that because those usually take a while, but it depends on kind of what models you're doing. But I really like the ability in Tableau Prep to sort of know that I've got a bunch of data processing that I need to get done, and I can do it in R script, and that R script can reach out to other data sources. It can pull in different functions, and then I can restructure everything in R and then spit that back into a Tableau Prep flow, right? So it's a really great use. And the other thing that you can do in Tableau with R is reach out to APIs, right? So we use Smartsheet for a lot of things internally. Our Tableau has a Smartsheet connector that does not work very well. So we actually use the Smartsheet API to do API calls to download data from Smartsheet, and then we have refreshes to upload those as extracts into Tableau Server. So it's not everybody has that as a skill set. It's really nice that we have, myself, a data scientist, analysts that have that as part of their skill set. we some of my staff is more sort of classically trained, I guess, in statistics from like an academic background. So we are an R focused shop, but if you have folks that are more trained from like computer science, machine learning, data science background, they probably have Python more as their skill set of choice or their tool of choice. So both work, both can do the same stuff. But yeah, it's a good skill set to have. So that was a lot. Next thing, is there anybody else sort of on the call that like deals with similar things where this could be useful or has used some of those integrations?
So I can say at a state level, this is huge. And we go through assessments with NHTSA for traffic records. We go through our own system designs and performance measures to just monitor how we're doing and how well the data is. The biggest thing is trying to provide samples and do a random sampling for our central records division to review reports even, right? Like I love the capability or the thought process behind trying to increase the probability of something. And I'm thinking like crash reports we're responsible for. We want to review crash reports, but we want to weight personal injury and fatality crashes more than the property damage crashes, right? So being able to take that and maybe even by county, we might want to look at specific counties because of the types of crashes or lack thereof, right? And include those in some of this. So being able to do stuff like this and run it through and then have that ability just to throw it into their laps is something that I've been wrestling with trying to figure out. So we can just monitor our performance, right? And put metrics together to say our data is accurate. Our data is being sampled and reviewed because we can't review 100,000, 200,000 crashes a year. It just doesn't happen, right? So I think it's huge in any of these locations in an agency that use performance metrics, have audits, have some sort of concept for sampling, and you throw it into their laps. Even these Tableau Prep flows, I'm thinking you could allow these central records individuals or individuals that are doing these things to sample their own at the time they need it, right? So they can run this flow, they can have a couple parameters that they can add to this, and then it's built for them, for them to be able to then return this data set that they open up the dashboard and here's all the stuff you need. So there's a lot of ways this could go, I think, and a lot of use cases that we just don't think about because it's using a scripting language, right?
Yeah.
It's going outside Tableau to do this, so it's not like in everybody's toolbox. But
yeah, and I think that idea of making it self-service is really cool, right? Because somebody might need to pull a sample today, right? I might like most of what I've done is like scheduling at the beginning of the month because we have audit schedules, right? That like here's our monthly audits that we do. But like it might be records like, all right, I need to audit 10 today. Give me a sample of 10, right? And then I think about, you have 100,000 crash records and you sample enough of those that you have a sample that gives you you can actually get your confidence intervals around your sample. If you have a large enough sample size, you can say, we found X number of errors and we're confident that, 1 to 5% has errors based on the number that we've reviewed, which is within our acceptable margin of error. So I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, a lot of good options for it.
Let me know. I'm happy to share any of the code and then also point you to tools like ChatGPT are great for writing our code, especially if you give them a sample of what you're looking for and then modifying it. So they don't debug very well. So some of the stuff of like integrating into Tableau or things like that don't debug very well, but sort of the basic structure, it's pretty good at if you're not great at a scripting language, but want to do it. models are getting much better at spitting things out that look pretty darn correct. All right. All right. So the last example I had talked about was validations. I'm not going to go super into this, but like basically what we had put together was like what we talked about early, like at the beginning of this conversation, was that like we had data quality issues, and so we have business rules in place that, like, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on this screenshot, but like, if you have a disposition on your case, on an IA case, so like your disposition says that it's sustained, but you have allegations in IA Pro that don't have a finding on them, that's a data entry issue, right? If you have, a disposition of sustained, but then you don't have any findings that are sustained, that's a data entry issue. If you say that if your disposition is exonerated, but you have sustained findings on it, that's an issue, right? So we defined out a bunch of business rules working with IA and said, if this is true, then this other thing cannot be true, right? Like if you have, like we have a list of disciplinary actions, right? So this check is incorrect discipline being imposed. So like we have a known set of disciplinary actions for officers, right? If you have a sustained misconduct. One of them is not closed. Like closed is not a disciplinary action. So what we did was we defined these out so that every month I can send this to our admins who are in charge of the data so that they can go through this list and clear off anything that has a potential error. We recently added suspensions with 0 hours because we saw suspensions come in that said that there were 0 suspension hours. And if there's a suspension, you can't have 0 hours, right? You have to have, some suspension hours on there. So sometimes they go like, oh, well, this was reduced during an appeal to 0 hours. I'm like, cool. Well, then you have to change it from a suspension to whatever the new discipline was. And so this has gotten the data to be much cleaner because I can just send this report where it tells them what unit did the investigation, who's responsible for updating it, and then kind of points them to the file number or the officer who is having issues, like the data entries on which officer, and then gets them much closer to being able to update it, right? Like you can't have a sustained finding with no discipline, right? That just isn't supposed to happen, right? And there's edge cases that we kind of have to address when weird stuff happens. Like during appeals, there's some weird stuff that can happen, but we address those as we go through. But generally, there are definable business rules that govern how data should be entered into IA Pro. It's the same, like Force has its own business rules, Internal Affairs has its own business rules, vehicle crashes have their own business rules. Everything's got its own set of business rules. And when you sit down with your experts on data entry, or who are actually doing the data entry, getting those defined, is that step of trying to get your data prepped so that your monthly reports can be more automated, or take less time, that your public facing reports could take less time. And then your annual reports are not so painful, right? I remember my first year working here when we started our annual use of force report, and the previous years of data, I was sending lists of hundreds of cases that had data entry issues, right? There'd be stuff that like, oh, this person has an injury, but we don't document their treatment anywhere. Or this person was like sent to the hospital, but they have no injury. So those kinds of data entry issues, like we were sending hundreds of them. And we're down to the point where we send a couple a month, right? Maybe 3 or 4 a month. And that's in, 100 cases or so. So our ability to sort of be more accurate is leaps and bounds ahead. So I'll go ahead and sort of, I had prepared these examples really focused on like data maturity with some specific use cases that we use for compliance of like, increase our speed of public reporting, improve our internal oversight mechanisms through like random sampling, and then, improve our data quality through defining out our business rules and, creating feedback loops. And that's really how we did a lot of our data quality advancement that sort of helped us along through the consent decree. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing there. This is stuff that like I could talk about for a long time, but I kind of want to open up to conversation at this point because it's a small group, and I'm interested. All of us work in public safety. All of us probably deal with similar issues around data quality. We probably all work with similar systems like IA Pro. I guess what kind of challenges do people run into on some of these data quality or sort of internal oversight pieces that y'all think about?
I'll add to that too, Peter, real quick. So I saw also in a lot of dashboards, and I see it consistently, where use of force is being compared to contacts, incidents, things like that. So to add to that, how is it working with RMS vendors, right? And where is that data, and how does that come into play? Because some RMS vendors, it's more difficult to gain access to that data, and others it's not. So just curious, when we're talking about all these different ways of doing things, how have you guys dealt with and handled even the RMS data to make that more usable? And that's such a greater data set than my pro data set, right? The number of incidents that we have in a year. So throw that out there too as another talking point or question.
Yeah, so we are so we use Mark 43 as our RMS vendor, and it comes with a data lake. So we have a data lake that we're able to pull from. It's a SQL Server data lake. We've had a few kind of hiccups with like making sure that we're getting data from the RMS vendor, and making sure that we're getting out from the data lake correctly, and had some issues with like timeouts when we were pulling, because they have some processes that kill long-running queries. And so we had some issues with like incremental loads not working super well because of how they structure their views in the database. But those are all sort of issues that we worked through over time. And generally we update all of our offense and arrest and report data from our RMS every morning or overnight, and then are able to sort of use our RMS data as of yesterday. So we don't have it attached in sort of near real time. That's one of the goals I have for like later this year, is to get more near real time reporting of that, so that it's directly hitting the data lake. But we don't have that set up yet. It's an enhancement that we're working towards. But once we get all these things pulled together as data sources in Tableau, then it's quick and easy, right? I think the biggest headache is the sort of before it hits Tableau side. Once it's there and is a data source, then it's, pretty wicked fast. It works really well. We can aggregate everything in prep flows to the right, we try to aggregate things to like the week or month when we're doing some of those comparative metrics, and then do all the joins and flows. So it's not a whole bunch of like nested calculated fields that become kind of a mess to debug.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I'll just say this, Peter. It's watching you present on the sampling. I wish I had met you 5, 6, 7 years ago when we were doing something similar. We were working with the ACLU to monitor some of our ISR data, our stop and frisk cards. And we wound up in a situation where we weren't sampling to their satisfaction. And we actually worked together to provide all of our stop and frisk data on a regular basis in essentially Excel spreadsheets, which 90% of my gray hair that I have now stems directly from that project. So
You mean it's not from Oksana?
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that's the other 10%.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But yeah,
Thank you, Chris.
Because like the provability point, I think is interesting, is like from what you said, like you might be doing it, but can you prove it?
Yeah.
Exactly. And that was precisely our problem, right? We had a contractor who was doing the sampling, and scientifically, I mean, so I'm a trained sociologist too, and it was true. We were relatively random sampling, but we couldn't prove it. Right. So your technique would have been perfect, and I wish we had it.
Yeah, and that's kind of, I think, what I'm as a sociologist, I know what I'm like. I was trained very heavily on like the importance of randomness, but being able to prove it is kind of like what the consent decree is all about, right? It's like you might be doing the thing, but unless you can prove the thing, you never did it, right? And so that's been where I have really tried to lean. And early on was like, can we document everything, and where do we document it? And how do we then? It might be that the commander who was pulling a sample from the CAD system was doing a great job and it was truly random, but I can't prove it, right? I can't prove what he pulled, why he pulled it, the probability of any case being selected, but I can if I do it, right? And I can if I, track everything and have it just running as an automation that's actually auditable. So that's a great point.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that.
All right.
All right. Looks like we're dwindling down here. So I guess we'll wrap it up. And Pete, I appreciate everything you've done. And I know we've talked about the sampling before, and it keeps coming up as a really good option that we just don't think about. So hopefully this will catch on a little bit more as we go. And, everything you've done is right on target with what most agencies should be doing, especially when consent decrees play a part in this, that we need to do a better transparency of the data and how we use it and what we do. And the sampling is obviously a big hot topic as that comes around. So appreciate the time and the effort put into this to help us understand this a little better and give us some more things in our tool belt to use.
Yeah, and anyone feel free to reach out by email or LinkedIn or whatever to, if you have any questions. Our evangelical person, I like to evangelize the importance of more advanced analytics. And I think R is a great tool for that in agencies. So if I can help at all, happy to do it and talk about, more specific use cases or help get something set up. So.
All right. Well, we appreciate it. I know Oksana and I are working on the next hug meeting. We're in conversations to try to get some of the Caresoft webinars to spill over into the TUG. So hopefully that'll be a big benefit for us to then be able to expand like we did on this one. I know the webinar didn't go into this much detail and be able to show things. So if you guys don't know about the Caresoft webinars, Oksana's been doing law enforcement webinars. I think there's, how many are there? 6 maybe that you're doing?
Yeah. Yes, I think 7. So
Okay,
yeah,
great.
now with the last one, 7.
So there's really good content there. If you search the Caresoft site, I don't know how to get to the actual list of them, but they're definitely out there. If you miss it, if not, they're up and coming.
Yeah.
So take a look at that.
I can make a little post in our Tableau public safety user group on LinkedIn. So
Perfect.
if you haven't joined that group, join it, and then we always share the recording there. The link to the recording, and then I can reshare again the link to the previous webinars.
There you go. And then the hope is that it'll spill over into the TUG, that we can do a deeper dive into some of those topics that we have more freedom and leeway here to do that. So looking forward to all that. And again, Pete, thanks for the time today and appreciate the effort you put into this.
Absolutely. Thank you.